Right guys, how are we doing? Okay, first 7 days with a newborn as a new mum. We went in for it, we're on day 10 now, so I feel like I'm out the other side of the first 7 days. Although, Jesus Christ, that was a bit of a whirlwind, shall we say. If you have watched it already, or if you want to watch it or are interested in it, my last upload was my home birth experience. So you can hear all about the labour and all that juicy goodness there. But this is going to be from 4:30 a.m. onwards on the 24th of January 2022 for the next 7 days. So, baby was born at home, as I just said, little Killian Finn Coles. I'll insert a little video of him here because little man is fast asleep right now, I'm afraid. So I didn't want to bring him up and be really snoozy for you guys, but yeah, little video of him there, little cutie pie. He is pretty much always asleep at the moment, which apparently is quite normal for newborns, but to the point where we have to set an alarm to wake him up to feed him, which I really didn't expect. Everyone talks about the lack of sleep that you get as a new parent, and yeah, there's a lack of sleep because you have to wake up every 2 to 3 hours to feed them, but for us, not because of crying. Like, there's no like tears in the night that are waking us up. There's only alarms, and then we wake him up, and then he gets really annoyed because we've woken him up from his little beauty sleep. So that's the first thing, I suppose, that was a bit of a surprise for us. Make sure that you do set alarms, because the first night, or the first morning I suppose, because he was born at 4:30 in the morning, we then went to sleep at around sort of 6 a.m. because he was born at home, so we could just go upstairs, get in our bed. We put him to bed, we went to sleep, we didn't set an alarm to feed him. So we then woke up sort of 4 hours later and he hadn't fed anything, he hadn't eaten because he hadn't woken us up. So we learned from that point forwards, always set an alarm for like 2.5 hours. So if they're not going to wake up, you're going to wake up to feed them. It's bull when people say never wake up a sleeping baby. Like, absolute rubbish. When they're brand new newborns, they don't know necessarily when they need to eat, and you need to keep their body weight up because they can lose up to 10% of their body weight in the first few days of them being born, like after labour. So you need to make sure you're getting that body weight back up again. And as of day 9, he was back up above his birth weight, but he lost, he went down to 4% I think on day 5 he'd lost 4% of his body weight, and he's built it back up again now. So it's just something to be aware of. So biggest thing for us, I suppose, in the first 24 hours, aside from just being hugely in love with this new little bundle, although I have to say, I got a huge rush of, oh my god, I've done this, it's amazing, empowering experience, I've given birth, did it at home, barely any pain relief, it was wonderful, whatever, all of that was great. But I didn't feel an instant connection to him. I loved him, and I knew this is amazing, he's mine, but there was no like clicking into place that people talk about. They say, you know, you look down at them and they're yours, and I think that's something that isn't talked about a lot. It's not normalised, I suppose, and I've got quite a few friends who have talked about, like privately to me, about the fact that they didn't feel that instant click with their babies. And I feel like because we don't talk about it and there's a bit of a stigma associated with it, you know, you're supposed to look at your baby and fall in love with them and they are everything to you and you collapse in tears and all of this. And I don't know, it took a few days, I think, for me to really emotionally fully invest in him. I thought he was beautiful, adorable. I definitely loved him, but not like I do now. Like now he's like my whole world. And I think, I don't know, there just wasn't, I can't quite put it into words because I did definitely love him, but there just wasn't that really tight, you're everything to me bond that I expected, this big moment. But then it builds over time, and I think a lot of that is just the huge dip in different chemicals and the big change in your body over those 24 hours, 48 hours after labour. You know, there's huge changes going on. Your milk's starting to come in. You've just had a huge surge of oxytocin to bring on labour and to give birth to this child. You've had this experience which, to go through labour, is one of the most mind-boggling experiences I think you'll ever go through. I mean, I still look at him and I'm like, how 10 days ago did you look like that, but you lived in here? It's weird to look at a human being and think you were inside me and I created you from scratch with Hugh. Like, you were nothing and then you were a thing. I mean, it boggles the mind. But anyway, I don't think we've given enough space, I think, to the fact that there is so much going on at that moment. So to then expect this magical, wonderful click to just happen when the baby gets here, I don't know. I didn't have it, and I'm happy to say that I didn't have it. I loved him. He was beautiful. He was great. But I did keep looking at him and I kept saying to Hugh, he looks like such a generic baby, you know? Like, lots of babies look very, very similar, and people always say, you know, you really love your own baby and they are everything to you, and like everybody thinks their own baby is the most beautiful. I thought he was adorable and cute, but I still thought he looked like a generic baby. It took a few days until I was just like, oh, you're the best little squidge thing and you are mine. Okay, so big learning for us in the first 24 hours was how many clothes baby needs to wear. So I now know that baby needs to wear what mum is wearing +1. That's like the rule of thumb. So if you're wearing a t-shirt, he should probably be wearing a vest and a t-shirt, you know, to make sure you keep them warm. Killian gets very cold cold very easily, which we couldn't have known. So when we put him to bed the first night, when we dressed him the next day, all of this sort of thing, we were only really dressing him in like the same as what we were wearing, so like a t-shirt and some trousers or like, I don't know, whatever. Hugh and I are also quite cold people. We really like the house being freezing. Like, we sleep with the windows open in the middle of winter. We weren't doing that, we were having the heating on, but still, we weren't really understanding how cold he was. And unfortunately, because he's quite a cold baby, add that on top of that, and it meant that he got quite sick in the first 24 hours. So we saw the midwife at the end of the day on the first day, on the day he was born, and she said his temperature was a bit low, but he was okay, everything else was fine. So she left, we went to bed that night totally fine. The next day we took his temperature and it had dropped a little bit more, and it got down to like 35, and at this point we thought the thermometer's obviously broken, like he would have hypothermia if he had a 35-degree temperature. We also took my temperature and it was around the 36, and I also read quite low quite often, so it was a bit hard to understand if it was right or not. Towards the end of the day it was still reading around 35, so we rang the midwife again. She came down. Like, I love the home midwife team because they always just turn up at your house like at the drop of a hat. They are the most helpful team. The guys in St. Thomas's, Olive team midwives, the most wonderful ladies you've ever met. So helpful, I could sing their praises to the ends of the earth. So they popped over and she took his temperature and it was just as low on their thermometers. He developed this little shiver at that point. So she was like, look, you could try and warm him up a bit more. We tried for about 40 minutes. He wasn't really warming up hugely, but he was also permanently asleep. And she was like, it's probably best if you take him into A&E. So that's not what you want when your baby is little over 24 hours old and you're taking him into A&E. But we did, and we took him to King's in South London. And to be fair, the A&E team were wonderful. They saw us straight away, but it turned out that his temperature was really low, but also his blood sugar levels were really low, and they had to switch him onto formula to ensure that he was getting enough food. So he'd been latching okay, a little bit shallow, but he'd been latching onto my breast okay. When I say shallow, basically if the baby just sucks on the nipple, they get barely any milk out because the milk ducts are behind the areola, is that what it's called? So they need to put like a big chunk of nipple into their mouth, plus like the areola and all of that, and it needs to touch the back of their throat back here and up in the soft palate at the back. That's where the nipple should be touching, and it should be squeezing up so that they're squeezing and they're clamping. If you think if that's the nipple and that's the areola, they need to be clamping all the way back here. He was only clamping around here. We didn't know at that stage that he had a tongue tie. 4 midwives checked him for a tongue tie, and it was only diagnosed on the 5th midwife. So always get it double, triple, quadruple checked if you are struggling with breastfeeding. Anyway, so he was struggling a little bit with breastfeeding because of this tongue tie. I can't believe they didn't diagnose it in the hospital actually. But anyway, so they switched him with formula, which was great at the time because it did enable us to bring his blood sugar levels up. It enabled us to get him warmer because unfortunately we'd got in a big cycle. So as soon as his temperature dropped, he then wouldn't feed, which then meant that his temperature continued to drop, and it was a bit of a spiral. He also had loads of blood tests done because it could have been an infection, all these things. He was admitted into the children's ward, and which honestly, if you've seen a newborn baby in a full-size child's bed in a hospital, and then as a new mum to be given a cot on the floor and your husband told that he can't stay overnight because of COVID, and you're just on your own, and your newborn baby has a cannula in their hand and they're monitored on a heart rate monitor all night, and you're just, I can't, it was very emotional. And at the same time, because I had 2nd degree tears, I was also dealing with recovery. So I was 24 hours post delivery with quite a lot of stitches, to be honest, and just generally just no sleep at all really. We'd had about 2 hours sleep since the labour, so I went into labour on Sunday evening. He was born Monday morning and we were in the hospital by Tuesday, and I had probably had about 4, maybe 5 hours sleep since Sunday, so I was past it. On Wednesday morning, after we'd been admitted into the hospital, we'd spent the whole night there, they'd been feeding him and checking him on him regularly. He'd been getting like ops done every 2 hours to just monitor how his like levels were doing. I then was a little bit worried that I'd broken a stitch. If you've been in labour and you know what a 2nd degree tear is like, it makes it very hard to poo. More details on the labour video if you've seen it. But basically, I did break a stitch and I ended up having to go to A&E. I also had pains in my leg, which is a risk for DVT. So I went to, annoyingly, they couldn't see me in the children's unit and they couldn't see me at the maternity assessment unit, and they sent me to A&E, which, considering my little newborn son was sat in the children's ward, to then have to leave his side of the hospital and go and queue in A&E for 6 hours, sat on the floor on my own, was, I have to say, one of the most traumatic days of my life, I think. When I got to A&E and I was queuing up and I got to the front desk and I had to explain to them why I needed to see somebody, but then also just say my son is in the children's ward upstairs, my newborn son of like 24, 48 hours old is in the children's unit upstairs. That was the first time I'd ever said out loud, my son, and I absolutely broke down. It was the first time I'd cried since labour, and I just couldn't cope with it. The woman from the reception desk had to come round and help me. I was like absolutely just bawling my eyes out. I couldn't get the words out to say my son, because I just thought, like, I had the least traumatic labour, but those 48 hours, I can't think of anything worse than for the first time for you to say my son. You're saying my son is in the children's ward and I'm in A&E and I can't be with him. And also at the same time as this was going on, what I should have known, but I didn't. Nobody had ever told me, and I should really have thought about it, but there was so much going on, you don't think about these things. My boobs were coming in with milk, and he had been switched to formula by the hospital, so I wasn't expressing any milk because I just hadn't thought that I needed to. I didn't think about it. And my boobs were getting harder and harder and harder, and you could see veins like coming down my boobs at this point, and I didn't know what to do. And so over the course of, I probably didn't pump them for about 24 hours, and that started to make me feel very, very sick. And they were rock solid, really sore. And in the end, it took me about 3 or 4 days actually to start getting rid of the milk and really like look after them. Like, make sure that if you can't feed your baby straight after birth for whatever reason, make sure that you are expressing, to make sure that your milk is coming in and it's being encouraged to come in. Luckily, my supply hasn't suffered since that point. We haven't been able to get him fully back onto the breast yet. We actually had the feeding team pop over earlier this morning to help because the hospital switched him onto a bottle, which, like, they were doing it to care for him, I'm not complaining at all, but because he was switched onto a bottle, it's a lot easier for them to get milk from a bottle, so he's been rejecting the boob a little bit. So I've been having to pump every 2 hours, feed him the pumped milk, and then pump again so we have supply for the next feed, but also because you have to sterilize the bottles every time. Oh my lord, guys, basically everything, all I've been able to do for the last 7 days, pump milk, feed baby, sterilize bottles, then you're back and it's the end of the 2 hours and you are feeding baby, pumping milk, sterilizing bottles, and it just goes round and round and round and round and round and round and round. Especially difficult in the middle of the night because you also have to sterilize the pump that you're using and all of it every single time you feed them. I just can't even. Anyway, so I won't go on too much more about the hospital experience because it was brutal. I mean, I had to sit on the floor of A&E as well for those 6 hours while I waited, while Hugh was sat up there in the ward. I had no food. It was, just surrounded by ill people and COVID and all of this, and I didn't want to bring the germs back to my baby and just, ugh. Anyway, when we eventually got him home, life started to settle into far more of a rhythm. So we understood more about feeding at that point. And so we'd been told how much he needed to get in from a bottle feed every 2 to 3 hours. It felt like we really had something to aim for. And I would say as well at this point, NCT was great the whole way through the pregnancy, but the best thing about NCT for me has been the group of women or the group of couples, I suppose, that we now have in our local area that we can talk to or talk to on WhatsApp about all of these things, because it wasn't made clear to us in the NCT breastfeeding classes how difficult breastfeeding can be and how many people struggle with it, or even how many babies end up in hospital within the first few days of their lives. It just wasn't made clear. It was very romanticized, and over half of our NCT group, their babies have ended up in hospital for one reason or another. Nothing serious, but just little reasons that you've had to go to A&E. Or like conjunctivitis, babies' tear ducts don't work when they're first born, so lots of them get conjunctivitis when they're first born and their eyes stick together. Totally normal, totally fine. When I first saw yellow gunk coming out of my baby's eye, I thought I had given him the worst infection. I thought my brain went everywhere, because babies can pick up STDs and stuff when you deliver vaginally. For a second I thought, oh my god, when was I last tested? Is he okay? I've been with my husband for 10 years, so I would be shocked. I don't know how that would have happened, but your brain goes everywhere because you've never done this before and it's your child and you don't want to mess it up. But having that WhatsApp group and knowing that everybody in that group is having issues with breastfeeding, they're having issues with baby's weight, they're having issues with keeping baby warm, they're having issues, everybody is having the same problems. So having this group of people that you know and have spoken to and are going through it together and can support each other and share links and that sort of thing, hugely helpful, hugely. One of the other things that I didn't know to expect in the first 7 days, which has really surprised me, is the amount of medical visits that you'll have. So for example, the health visitor. This is actually a 10-day thing, we just had it today, but you have a health visitor pop round in the UK on day 10 to check the baby's weight and to basically talk to you about what health visitor does. So they stay with you from baby's birth to baby 5 years old, and they're basically your support as the baby develops. So you can call on them if baby's having behavioural issues, feeding issues, and they'll refer you to whichever service you need, basically. You'll also have to register your baby's birth, register them at doctors. You'll have midwives visits. So we have now had 3 midwife visits in the first 7 days. They come and they check baby's weight. So they came on day 1, day 5, and day 7. They came over to the house, checked baby's weight, they checked my stitches, they checked little things for us like conjunctivitis to see if it was infected and if it needed any antiseptic, didn't, just to check their breathing, just all of these little things to check that you understand like how to put the baby to bed safely, all of these little things. Answer all of those silly little questions that you just don't know because it's all brand new to you, and Google is the scariest place in the world when you're a new parent. So yeah, so 3 midwives visits. We have had a hearing appointment booked in. We have had a hip scan booked in. What else? I think that might be all of them. Basically almost every... Oh, and a feeding appointment we had today, but that was day 10, with the feeding team to basically help him to learn to latch again and help me to work with him to get him feeding off the bottle and back on the boob. So all of these different things. We basically had an appointment almost every day. There's probably only 1 or 2 days in the first 7 to 10 days where we haven't had to see a medical professional, which, pros and cons, wonderful because you never feel far from someone to check something. So you don't need to knee-jerk react to anything. If you have a concern, note it down. You'll probably be seeing someone in a couple of hours and they can... Oh, tongue tie appointment as well. Baby who was diagnosed with a tongue tie on Saturday and we got his tongue tie fixed yesterday. If you don't know, a tongue tie is that little bit at the bottom of your tongue that attaches the tongue to the bottom of your mouth. Sometimes it's too tight when babies are born and it means that they can't lift their tongue properly, which also hinders breastfeeding because they need to be able to lick and lap the nipple to encourage the milk out, which is often you'll find that it goes undiagnosed if you're bottle feeding a baby because it's a lot easier for them to bottle feed because they just need to like tap the teat. Also very hard to diagnose anyway. I told you we had 4 midwives check and doctors check for the tongue tie, and it was the 5th one that saw it. And when we went to the tongue tie clinic yesterday to get it fixed at Guy's, the doctor was like, this was a really severe tongue tie and it's at risk of growing back basically because it was so tight, so we have to massage it and make sure he's using his tongue every day to make sure that it doesn't grow back. But that was why breastfeeding was so hard for us and why his weight dropped at the start. It wasn't that we were too cold, it was that he wasn't able to eat enough. And actually my boob supply is incredibly good, so if I hand express, for example, I get roughly 90 mils at a time, which doesn't sound an awful lot, but if you're breastfeeding you'll know 90 mils is a damn good supply to be able to get from hand expression every hour or 2. So yeah, the reason he was so ill at first is because of the tongue tie. But we got that fixed as well. It's really interesting, some hospitals have a waiting, so King's, for example, in South London has a waiting list at the moment of about 4, 5, 6 weeks. Guy's St Thomas's has a waiting list of 3 days, which luckily we were at Guy's, but I would always ask for a referral because if you think about it, if your baby is not able to eat properly from your boob for the first 4 weeks of their life because of the tongue tie, you're going to really struggle to get them back onto the boob because they'll get so used to using a bottle. I mean, even after a week, Killian is so used to using a bottle, it's going to be a process to get him back onto the boob. And you don't have to use a boob, there's no reason you have to. I mean, I would be very, very happy. I want him to have breast milk, but I'd be very happy if it wasn't so exhausting, constantly sterilising all the bottles. I'd be super happy to just bottle feed him breast milk. It's just quite time intensive, and once Hugh goes back to work, it's going to be difficult for me to do all of that work on my own. Also, I have no issue with formula. I don't believe breast is best. I believe feeding the baby is the best thing in the world. So if you want to do formula, do formula. It's totally fine. Formula's amazing nowadays. Whatever works for you. I just happen to want to do breast milk. So yes, tongue tie. Let me finish that first. Oh my god, the amount of things I'm going on about. So yeah, lots of appointments in the first week. Prepare yourself for that. Tongue tie. Once you've got it I'm doing 2 stories at once. Once you've got your tongue tie appointment, people always say it's harder for the parents than it is for the child. Particularly difficult at the moment because of COVID. You're only allowed one of you in there. However, if you go into the NHS to get it done, the nurses hold down the child. So you can go privately and a midwife will come to your house and just snip it because it's just a case of cutting it at the back, I think. I didn't watch, but I think it's just a case of cutting it. It takes literally 10 seconds anyway, so it can't be much more than that. They can do it at your house if you go privately, but you'll have to hold down the baby, which I know I wouldn't want to do. So if you do it at the NHS, there was 2 midwives holding down, or nurses holding down the baby, and then the doctor came and did the little snip, and then they give the baby straight back to you, straight on the boob because it has antiseptic properties, and the feeding team help help you to get him to latch on. What was really funny is his latch was perfect straight after that appointment, and I left feeling so ecstatic, and then I got home and he suddenly wouldn't attach anymore. And the feeding team came today to see me at home the day after the appointment, and it was funny because it was the feeding team from another hospital, and she was saying, oh, you know, they always let you leave the hospital without telling you that actually the latch is great now, but it won't be for the next few days because they've got a sore tongue, and they never tell you that, so everyone leaves hospital feeling great, and then you have a big come down afterwards. And I was like, this makes so much more sense. Of course it's sore for him. Actually, the feeding team, we had Linda from King's come today, and she's wonderful. If anyone's in South London, she was just phenomenal. I have never had an appointment which left me feeling so confident, and I haven't actually, because it was only this morning, I haven't actually fed him since. He's due a feed now whenever he wakes up, but the methods that she showed us and how to get him to latch and new positions and new ways of lying on your side, for example, to try and encourage him to do it himself, and also you can lie there for longer, it made me feel so much better. I'm really actually looking forward to feeding later, and fingers crossed it all works. Anyway, I think they're the biggest things for me about the first 7 days with baby. And also I'd just say it's honestly, I don't think it's as hard as people make out, or at least for us it wasn't. I can just hear him crying now, so I'm gonna have to leave in a second, but it's just a process. I think we just need to give ourselves a break. I'm the worst person for trying to go a mile a minute all the time, constantly trying to do, like, I'm filming YouTube videos and I'm only 10 days postpartum, and I posted an Instagram ad the day he was born, 2 hours after he was born. Like, I didn't have to, but it was scheduled, and I thought, well, to hell with it, I might as well do it. I'm awake. But I would just say, give yourself a break, you know? Like, you are recovering from potentially a huge surgery, or if not surgery, then labor, which is huge. Your body is going through the biggest hormone change any human body will ever go through in 48 hours after labor. You are learning to keep a human alive for the first time ever. You're probably getting by on no more than 2 hours sleep at a time, if that, because the baby needs to eat every 2 to 3 hours. And it's not just about waking up to feed the baby, which will take 20 minutes or so, half an hour. You also then need to do the other things that comes with that. So it's settling the baby back down, it's waking the baby up, it's sterilizing the bottles, it's getting the bottles ready for the next feed if you are bottle feeding, or sorting out the formula, or packaging away breast milk that you've expressed and putting it in the fridge. That whole process can take about an hour, which means that you then only get an hour to sleep, and then you're starting all over again. And that happens all day. There's no let up. That's 24 hours a day. So you just need to let yourself be in that space. I would highly encourage you not to schedule people to come and visit. At least for me, we haven't had anyone come and visit yet in the first 10 days other than medical professionals. That's been great for us because I haven't worried about getting up and getting dressed. I haven't worried about anything other than me, Hugh and Killian and food. And on that note, I can hear him crying, which means that he's probably hungry. So I'm going to leave you guys to it. Remember to subscribe, like, comment, let me know if you want to know anything more. I'm on maternity leave now, so I am definitely going to be doing more YouTube videos for you guys, probably baby related. But if you want to see more of us and Killy Bobs, who is featuring on my Instagram quite frequently at the moment, head over to One Slow Sunday on Instagram. I'm always there every day. I know I'm useless at YouTube and being here, but I'm always on Instagram. Thanks guys, thanks for watching. Hope that was helpful. Speak to you all soon. Bye.